My CPS client attacked me in front of his terrified daughter, who later ended her life because of him. So I teamed up with his wife to expose him, and we found out that his disturbing secrets were way more terrifying than we ever imagined. I worked as a social worker for 10 years, and retired when my reports went nowhere. When I was finishing high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was that I needed a job, I liked helping people, and my grades weren't the best. And that's how I decided to become a social worker. The course was filled with girls who were a mixed bundle, to say the least. Some of them, maybe like 3, were nice girls who wanted to help humanity. The rest of them were complete bullies that I tried to avoid like the plague. Go figure. Fast forward 4 years later. I got my degree and was assigned to work in CPS for $30,000 a year with 14-hour shifts. And don't get me wrong, I know it was the path I had chosen, but it still sucked. A lot. Because even aside from the pay, what I see every day is enough to bring some people to their knees. Kids being struck with no way out. Parents lighting their offspring on fire. Infants found in conditions that could unalive a grown man. And the worst part was, I couldn't even do anything. It was like the systems in place were designed to make as little change as possible. But of course the families didn't see it that way, and they always blamed us. And thanks to the paperwork system, for every hour I spent with a family, I'd spend 3 documenting everything in triplicate. The software was from 1995, crashed constantly, and if you forgot to save every 5 minutes, you were screwed. I'd write these detailed reports about kids with cigarette burns, malnutrition, and watch them disappear into some bureaucratic black hole. My supervisor, Linda, had been there 25 years and had perfected the art of looking concerned while doing absolutely nothing. You have to understand, she'd tell me, lighting her 15th cigarette of the day, reunification is always the goal. Even when reunification meant sending a toddler back to parents who'd broken his arm twice. The worst cases were the ones where you knew something terrible would happen. This one family, the Johnsons, had more red flags than a communist parade. Dad had a violent record, mom was deep in denial, and their 7-year-old daughter Katie would flinch whenever anyone raised their hand. I filed report after report, visited twice a week, begged my supervisor to push for removal. Not enough evidence, Linda said. The home is adequate. They're completing their parenting classes. Parenting classes always ticked me off, as if sitting in a room for 2 hours learning about positive discipline would fix someone who saw their child as a punching bag. The other families on my caseload weren't much better. Single moms who aged 10 years in one, trying to work 3 jobs while their kids raised themselves. Grandparents suddenly caring for 6 grandkids because their adult children were lost to the substance crisis. Foster families who were clearly in it for the monthly check. And through it all, us social workers were the enemy. We were either doing too much or not enough, taking kids away or leaving them in danger. My coworkers were burning out left and right. Sarah quit after a baby on her caseload died. One she'd flagged for emergency removal 3 times. Marcus started drinking heavily after testifying in court for the 100th time, only to watch another abuser get unsupervised visitation. In my office of 12, I was considered a veteran after just 2 years. The Johnson case haunted me the most. I knew something was building. Dad was getting angrier during visits. Mom was coaching Katie on what to say. Then came that Tuesday evening. A neighbor had called about screaming, and I had to do an emergency home check. I should have brought the police. That's what the protocol said. But they'd stopped responding to our calls unless there was immediate danger, and by the time you could prove immediate danger, it was usually too late. So I went alone. When I knocked, Mr. Johnson answered, reeking of alcohol. Mom was nowhere to be seen. Katie was in the corner, that familiar, terrified look in her eyes. I told him I needed to speak with Katie alone. Standard procedure. That's when everything went sideways. What happened next is something so horrifying that I don't want to describe it. Mr. Johnson, my client, had stolen my innocence right in front of his daughter, staring at me with horror. Needless to say, I ended up in the ER with a concussion and injuries. My supervisor's first concern, the liability, the paperwork, whether I'd followed proper procedures, not whether I was okay. The union rep mentioned I could get workers' comp for the physical injuries, but the other stuff would be harder to prove. I never went back after that. My therapist said it was PTSD, but I think it was just clarity. I was going to run far away and never look back. But the next day, I got a call from my work friend. Katie had unalived herself, and since I wasn't working for the Johnsons anymore, I knew I had to make her dad pay. The funeral was 3 days later. I stood at the back of the church, watching Mr. Johnson play the grieving father. He dabbed at dry eyes while Mrs. Johnson stared straight ahead, her face completely blank. The other mourners whispered about what a tragedy it was, how no one saw it coming. I wanted to scream. After the service, I waited by my car until most people had left. Mrs. Johnson was walking alone to her vehicle when I intercepted her. She flinched when she saw me, then looked around nervously. Please, I said, I need to talk to you about Katie. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her keys. I can't. He'll know. He's still inside with the pastor. Just 5 minutes. She glanced back at the church, then nodded quickly. We sat in my car, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she rolled up her sleeve, revealing bruises in various stages of healing. I know what he did to you, she whispered. I was there, hiding in the hallway. I saw everything. My stomach lurched. You were there? She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. I've been recording him for months. His threats, his admissions. I was too scared to do anything before, but Katie, her voice broke. She played me a recording. Mr. Johnson's slurred voice filled the car, bragging about how he'd taught that nosy social worker a lesson, and how Katie knew better than to talk now. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Why didn't you come forward? I asked. You don't understand what he's capable of, but Katie's gone now. Nothing matters anymore except making him pay. We exchanged numbers, and she promised to send me the recordings. Over the next few days, we texted constantly. She told me she was going to pretend to reconcile with him, get him comfortable enough to let his guard down. I warned her it was dangerous, but she was determined. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to other families from my old caseload. I remember remembered Mr. Johnson had worked at a youth center years ago. Through social media, I found 3 families whose kids had been in his programs. Their stories were eerily similar: complaints that went nowhere, kids who suddenly became withdrawn, investigations that mysteriously stalled. One mother, Alexandra, had kept meticulous records. Her son Cole had tried to report Mr. Johnson 5 years ago, but the center claimed there was insufficient evidence. We started a group chat, sharing our experiences and evidence. Mrs. Johnson's plan seemed to be working. She sent me updates about how her husband was relaxing around her, even bragging about his past victories. She recorded him admitting he'd driven Katie to Sewerslide by telling her it was her fault I got hurt. Each recording made me physically sick, but we needed the evidence. Then things started unraveling. Mr. Johnson found one of her phones. She'd hidden it poorly on purpose to test his reaction. He went ballistic, throwing furniture and screaming. She barely made it out of the house and drove straight to my apartment. She showed up at 2 a.m., bruised and terrified. We called the police, but they said without immediate danger, she'd have to file a report in the morning, the system failing us again. He didn't waste time. By dawn, he was leaving threatening voicemails on both our phones. He showed up at the grocery store where Mrs. Johnson worked part-time, causing such a scene that security had to escort him out. He followed me to my therapist's office, sitting in his truck across the street, just watching. We filed police reports, but they moved at a glacial pace. The detective assigned to our case had 30 other files on his desk. He suggested we get restraining orders, as if a piece of paper would stop someone like Mr. Johnson. The other families pooled money to hire a private investigator named Nicholas. He was a former cop who'd quit in disgust at the system. He believed our story immediately and started building a comprehensive case. Mrs. Johnson had an idea. She would invite Mr. Johnson to a public restaurant to discuss reconciliation. Nicholas would be there with recording equipment, and I'd be at a nearby table as backup. It was risky, but we were running out of options. The meeting was set for a Friday evening at a busy steakhouse. Mrs. Johnson wore a wire Nicholas had provided. I sat 3 tables away, pretending to read a menu while my heart pounded. Mr. Johnson showed up hammered but trying to hide it. He ordered whiskey before even sitting down. For 20 minutes, Mrs. Johnson played her part perfectly, apologizing for overreacting, saying she wanted to work things out. But something was off. Mr. Johnson kept staring at her chest where the wire was hidden. His eyes narrowed. "You're acting strange," he said. She tried to deflect, but he grabbed her wrist. "Let's talk in my truck." She tried to refuse, but he was already pulling her up. I abandoned my cover and followed them to the parking lot. Nicholas was right behind me. Mr. Johnson had her cornered against his truck. "You think I'm stupid? You're wearing a wire." He reached for her shirt, and that's when I intervened. "Let her go." He spun around, his face contorting with rage when he saw me. "You! This is all your fault. You destroyed my family. You destroyed your family," I shouted back. "You unalived Katie." That's when he snapped. "She was weak, just like you were weak when I showed you what happens to people who don't mind their business. And you know what? I'd do it again." He lunged at me, but Mrs. Johnson grabbed his arm. The 3 of us struggled, him trying to get to me, her trying to hold him back, me trying to stay out of reach. Nicholas appeared with his camera, capturing everything. "You think you've won?" Mr. Johnson screamed. "I've been doing this for years. That youth center job, those kids loved me. Their parents loved me. No one ever believed them because I'm smart. I know how to work the system." Restaurant security finally arrived, 2 big guys who easily restrained him. He was still ranting when the police showed up, confessing to everything in his rage. The wire had caught it all. Nicholas's camera had recorded the parking lot confrontation. The arrest was swift. With the recordings, the video, and testimonies from multiple families, the district attorney finally had enough for serious charges: assault, child endangerment, and additional charges related to his time at the youth center as more victims came forward. During the trial, I had to testify about that night at the Johnson house. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but Katie deserved justice. Mrs. Johnson testified too, playing recording after recording. The other families shared their stories. Mr. Johnson was convicted on all counts, 25 years in prison. It wasn't enough for what he'd taken from us, but it was something. After the trial, Mrs. Johnson and I worked with the other families to establish the Katie Johnson Memorial Fund. We provide emergency legal assistance for families trapped in the system, helping them navigate the bureaucracy that had failed us all. I never returned to social work. The trauma was too deep, the system too broken. But through the fund, I found a different way to help. We've assisted dozens of families in getting the protection they need, the protection Katie should have had. Mrs. Johnson and I became close friends, bonded by tragedy but determined to create something positive from our pain. She volunteers with the fund full-time now, using her experience to help other mothers recognize the signs and find the courage to act. Nicholas continues to work with us pro bono on cases the system ignores. Alexandra and the other parents from the youth center have become advocates, pushing for better background checks and oversight. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that night at the Johnson house. My therapist says the PTSD may never fully go away. But when I think about the families we've helped, the children we've protected, I know Katie's death wasn't entirely in vain. The system that failed her still needs massive reform. Social workers still face impossible caseloads and bureaucratic nightmares. But at least now, some families have somewhere to turn when the system fails them. I keep a picture of Katie on my desk at the fund's office, 7 years old, smiling in what must have been a rare moment of happiness. I couldn't save her, but her memory drives me to save others. That's the thing about trauma. It either destroys you or transforms you. Mr. Johnson tried to destroy me, just like he destroyed his daughter. But Katie's courage in her final moments, Mrs. Johnson's bravery in standing up to him, and the solidarity of other survivors transformed that destruction into purpose. The fund's office became our sanctuary, but peace was short-lived. 3 weeks after the trial, Mrs. Johnson burst through the door during one of our planning meetings, her face pale and hands trembling. "He's getting out," she gasped, collapsing into a chair. "His lawyer court filed an appeal, something about procedural errors during the arrest. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Alexandra rushed to clean it up while I stared at Mrs. Johnson in disbelief. Nicholas immediately pulled out his phone, making calls to his contacts in the district attorney's office. The news got worse. Mr. Johnson's new lawyer, some hotshot from the city, had found technicalities in how the evidence was collected. The restaurant confrontation, they argued, was entrapment. The recordings Mrs. Johnson made might be inadmissible because of state wiretapping laws. Over the next few days, we watched our carefully built case crumble. The judge granted a new trial, and Mr. Johnson was released on bail with an ankle monitor. The conditions stated he couldn't come within 500 feet of us, but we all knew how useless those restrictions were. Mrs. Johnson moved in with me permanently. Neither of us felt safe alone. We installed new locks, security cameras, and kept baseball bats by our beds. The other families in our support network reported strange cars parked outside their homes, hang-up calls in the middle of the night. Then the real harassment began. Dead animals appeared on our doorsteps. Our car tires were slashed repeatedly. Someone spray-painted liars across the fund's office windows. The police took reports but said without proof it was Mr. Johnson. Their hands were tied. Nicholas worked overtime trying to connect the harassment to him, but Mr. Johnson had learned from his mistakes. He was careful now, using intermediaries and staying just within the law. His ankle monitor showed he never violated the restraining order, at least not personally. One evening, Mrs. Johnson received a package with no return address. Inside was Katie's favorite stuffed animal, the one that had been buried with her. The grave had been disturbed. We both broke down sobbing, holding each other as the violation of Katie's resting place shattered something fundamental in us. The psychological warfare escalated. Mr. Johnson started a blog proclaiming his innocence, painting himself as a grieving father wrongly accused by a vindictive social worker and manipulative ex-wife. He gained supporters online who began harassing us on social media, sending death threats and accusations. Our fund's donations dried up as controversy swirled. Some board members resigned, not wanting to be associated with what Mr. Johnson's PR campaign painted as a witch hunt. We had to reduce our services, turning away families who desperately needed help. Alexandra's son Cole attempted to take his own life after being confronted at school by kids who'd read Mr. Johnson's blog. The guilt nearly destroyed Alexandra, and she withdrew from our group, unable to handle the renewed trauma. Mrs. Johnson started drinking heavily. I'd find her passed out on the couch, empty wine bottles scattered around, Katie's photo clutched in her hands. My own PTSD symptoms worsened. Panic attacks in grocery stores, nightmares so vivid I'd wake up screaming. Then came the night everything changed again. I was working late at the fund's office, trying to salvage what remained of our donor relationships. Mrs. Johnson had gone to an AA meeting, her first step toward getting help. The lights flickered, then went out completely. My heart hammered as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The backup generator should have kicked in, but nothing happened. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I grabbed the pepper spray from my desk drawer and crept toward the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, then jerked back as someone tried it from the other side. "Maintenance!" a muffled voice called. "Power's out in the whole building." Something felt wrong. Our building's maintenance staff always announced themselves by name. I backed away from the door, pulling out my phone to call 911. No signal. The landline was dead too. The door handle jiggled more aggressively. Then came the sound of metal on metal, someone picking the lock. I ran to the window, but we were on the third floor. The fire escape was on the other side of the building. The lock clicked open. I dove behind a filing cabinet as the door swung inward. A figure in dark clothing entered, flashlight sweeping the room. Not Mr. Johnson, too tall, different build, but I recognized the voice when he spoke into a phone. "She's here somewhere. Yeah, I'll make it look random. Junkie break-in gone wrong." My mind raced. Mr. Johnson had hired someone to unalive me. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall as the intruder methodically searched the office. He was getting closer. Then my phone buzzed with a text. The sound was deafening in the silence. The flashlight beam swung toward my hiding spot. I had seconds to act. I burst from behind the cabinet, spraying pepper spray wildly. The intruder cursed, stumbling backward. I ran for the door, but he recovered faster than expected, grabbing my ankle. I went down hard, my chin splitting open on the floor. We struggled in the darkness. He was stronger, but I fought with desperate fury. My hand found a heavy glass award on a shelf, some recognition the fund had received in better days. I swung it with all my strength. The impact made a sickening sound. The intruder went limp. I scrambled away, gasping, and ran into the hallway. The emergency exit stairs were pitch black, but I knew them by memory. I burst out of the building into the night, blood streaming from my chin. A patrol car was parked across the street. I ran to it, pounding on the window. The officers called for backup and an ambulance. When they searched the building, they found the intruder unconscious but alive, with a bag containing rope, duct tape, and a knife. Under interrogation, he admitted Mr. Johnson had paid him $10,000 to handle the social worker problem. But Mr. Johnson had been smart. All communication was through burner phones, payments in cash. The would-be killer's testimony alone wasn't enough. Mrs. Johnson was hysterical when she heard what happened. We spent the night in the hospital, her holding my hand as they stitched my chin. Nicholas arrived at dawn with devastating news. The intruder had recanted his confession, claiming I'd attacked him while he was checking on the building during the power outage. Mr. Johnson's lawyer spun it masterfully. Poor, grieving father, continually harassed by delusional women. The hired killer became a concerned citizen who'd noticed the lights out and went to investigate. My injuries were self-inflicted in my paranoid delusion. The fund's remaining board voted to shut down operations. We couldn't function under the cloud of controversy. Families we'd been helping were left adrift. Mrs. Johnson and I were pariahs, our reputations destroyed by Mr. Johnson's campaign. We moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, trying to disappear. But Mr. Johnson's reach was long. Landlords received anonymous tips about our instability. reality. Employers got calls warning them about hiring us. We burned through our savings as job after job fell through. Mrs. Johnson's drinking worsened. I found her one morning on the bathroom floor, empty med bottle beside her. The paramedics brought her back, but barely. As she recovered in the hospital, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "He's won. Katie's gone, and he's destroyed everything else." "No," I said firmly. "We're still here. We're still fighting." But she shook her head. "I'm done fighting. I'm leaving the state, starting over where he can't find me." The betrayal stung, but I understood. We'd been each other's support through hell, but sometimes survival means walking away. I helped her pack, drove her to the bus station, and watched her disappear into a new life. Alone now, I felt the weight of everything crushing down. Nicholas tried to maintain contact, but even he was feeling the pressure. His private investigation business suffered as Mr. Johnson's supporters left scathing reviews online. Then Alexandra reappeared. Her son Cole had stabilized, and she'd been quietly gathering evidence. Other families Mr. Johnson had terrorized over the years, too scared to come forward before, were starting to talk. She'd found a pattern: mysterious deaths, suicides, and disappearances connected to people who'd crossed him. We met in secret, building a new case. This time, we were smarter. No public confrontations, no traceable communications. We used encrypted apps, met in different locations, and documented everything redundantly. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman named Victoria contacted us through Alexandra. She'd been a secretary at the youth center where Mr. Johnson worked years ago. She'd kept copies of complaints that had mysteriously vanished from official files. Victoria was terrified, but Katie's death had haunted her. She knew she could have spoken up sooner. The documents she provided showed a clear pattern of abuse, cover-ups, and intimidation spanning over a decade. We needed one more piece, something current, undeniable. Nicholas had an idea. Mr. Johnson had grown comfortable again, confident he'd struck us. He'd started drinking at a particular bar, bragging to anyone who'd listen about outsmarting the system. Nicholas posed as a fellow bitter divorced man, buying Mr. Johnson drinks and commiserating about crazy ex-wives. It took weeks of careful cultivation, but eventually, Mr. Johnson's arrogance overcame his caution. The confession came pouring out one night, Mr. Johnson drunkenly boasting about everything: Katie, the assault on me, hiring the hitman, destroying evidence. Nicholas's hidden camera captured it all in high definition. This time, we didn't go to the local police. Nicholas had connections with the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. The federal investigation moved swiftly and secretly. They uncovered financial records showing payments to the hired killer, traced the harassment campaign, and verified Victoria's documents. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Federal agents surrounded Mr. Johnson's house. He tried to run but was tackled in his backyard. As they led him away in handcuffs, he screamed that we'd regret this, that his lawyers would destroy us. But federal prosecutors don't play games like local courts. The evidence was overwhelming. Mr. Johnson's support network crumbled as the full scope of his crimes became public. His blog was taken down, his flying monkeys scattered. Mrs. Johnson called me from wherever she was hiding. She cried with relief, finally able to start healing. She promised to return for the trial, to see justice finally served. The fund slowly rebuilt, though under a new name and structure. Families began reaching out again, trusting us to help. Alexandra became the director, her experience making her perfect for the role. I still couldn't return to social work. The trauma ran too deep, but I found purpose in training others, teaching them to recognize the signs I'd missed, to push harder against bureaucratic indifference, to protect themselves from predators like Mr. Johnson. The federal trial loomed ahead, promising to be grueling. We'd have to relive everything, face him again, endure his lawyer's attacks. But this time, we weren't alone. Survivors from across the years stood ready to testify. Mr. Johnson had thought he'd broken us, scattered us like Katie's ashes. He didn't understand that trauma, shared and witnessed, creates bonds stronger than fear. Every family he'd terrorized, every child he'd hurt, every life he'd destroyed, we were all connected now, united in ensuring he never hurt anyone again. The night before the trial was set to begin, I stood in Katie's room at the fund's new office, a space we'd dedicated to her memory. Photos covered the walls, not just of Katie, but of all the children we'd helped since. Their smiling faces reminded me why we fought. Nicholas found me there, bringing coffee and sitting beside me in comfortable silence. We'd all been forever changed by Mr. Johnson's evil, but we'd also discovered our own strength. Katie's death had sparked something that couldn't be extinguished. "Ready for tomorrow?" Nicholas asked. I touched the scar on my chin, a permanent reminder of that night in the office. I've been ready since the day Katie died. As dawn approached, bringing the trial that would finally hold Mr. Johnson accountable, I thought about Mrs. Johnson, wherever she was, preparing to face her demon. About Alexandra and Cole, turning their pain into purpose. About all the families who'd found their voices. Mr. Johnson had created his own downfall through his arrogance and cruelty. He'd thought the system that had protected him for so long would continue to shield him, but he'd underestimated the power of truth, persistence, and the unbreakable bonds forged in shared trauma. The federal courthouse loomed before us, all marble and intimidation. Mrs. Johnson had flown in the night before, thinner than I remembered, but with steel in her eyes. We met in the lobby with Alexandra, Cole, Victoria, and 17 other survivors who'd come forward after Mr. Johnson's arrest. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Ramirez, walked us through what to expect. Federal trials moved differently than state courts. Stricter rules, less room for theatrics. Mr. Johnson's new legal team had tried every trick to suppress evidence, but federal judges weren't easily swayed. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping back into the Johnson house. My hands shook as I took my seat behind the prosecution table. Mr. Johnson sat across the aisle in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive lawyers flanking him. He'd lost weight in custody, but his eyes still held that predatory gleam. The first day was jury selection. selection. Mr. Johnson's team tried to stack it with older men who might sympathize with a wrongly accused father. Ramirez systematically dismantled their attempts, securing a diverse panel who seemed genuinely interested in justice. Opening statements hit hard. The defense painted Mr. Johnson as a grieving father persecuted by a vengeful social worker and bitter ex-wife. They claimed the recordings were doctored, the witnesses coached, the evidence circumstantial. Ramirez methodically laid out 20 years of abuse. She had charts, timelines, financial records. The hired killer's bank deposits matched withdrawals from accounts Mr. Johnson thought he'd hidden. Phone records showed calls between them despite his denials. Victoria testified first, bringing boxes of documents from the youth center. Each complaint form had been meticulously preserved. 5 boys from that era, now grown men, took the stand to describe what Mr. Johnson had done when no one was watching. Their testimony was devastating. One man, now a teacher himself, broke down describing how Mr. Johnson had threatened his little sister if he ever told. Another revealed sewer slide attempts throughout his teens, the trauma following him into adulthood. Mrs. Johnson took the stand on day 3. She played recording after recording, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. The courtroom went silent as Mr. Johnson's hammered confessions filled the space, admitting to driving Katie to sewer slide, bragging about assaulting me, laughing about fooling the system for decades. The defense tried to shake her, suggesting she'd been motivated by divorce proceedings, custody battles, money. She never wavered. When they implied she'd coached Katie to lie, she stood up and looked directly at Mr. Johnson. "You unalived our daughter," she said clearly, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows it." The judge had to call a recess when Mr. Johnson lunged toward her, his lawyers barely restraining him. The jury saw it all, the rage that lurked beneath his polished exterior. My testimony came on day 5. Ramirez walked me through that night at the Johnson house, letting me describe everything in clinical detail. The defense objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed it. Federal rules about relevance were broader when establishing patterns of behavior. Cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Johnson's lawyer suggested I'd been attracted to him, that I'd made advances he'd rejected. He painted me as unstable, vindictive, incompetent. I kept my voice level, sticking to facts, even when he brought up my PTSD diagnosis. Then came the security footage Nicholas had uncovered from nearby businesses. The night of the attempted unaliving at the fund's office, cameras had caught Mr. Johnson meeting with the hired killer 2 blocks away, handing over an envelope. His ankle monitor placed him there despite his alibi. The hired killer himself testified as part of a plea deal. He described how Mr. Johnson had found him through prison connections, how payment was structured, what his specific instructions had been. Make it look random, make sure she suffered, leave no witnesses. Nicholas presented his evidence like the seasoned investigator he was. The hidden camera footage from the bar was crystal clear. Mr. Johnson, hammered and boastful, confessing to everything. The audio was perfect. No room for claims of doctoring or manipulation. The defense's case crumbled quickly. Character witnesses they'd lined up mysteriously decided not to testify. Their expert, who was supposed to discredit the recordings, admitted under cross-examination that they appeared authentic. Even Mr. Johnson's own brother refused to provide an alibi. Mr. Johnson took the stand against his lawyer's advice. He tried to play the grieving father, but Ramirez systematically destroyed him. She had him read his own blog post calling Katie weak. She played his recorded threats against Mrs. Johnson. She showed financial records of payments to intimidate witnesses. His composure cracked when she brought up Katie's stuffed animal. Security footage from the cemetery showed him digging up her grave, taking the toy to torment us. He screamed that we'd driven him to it, that we'd destroyed his life, that Katie would still be alive if I'd minded my own business. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. We waited in a small room, survivors huddled together, sharing stories and tissues. Cole sat beside his mother, holding her hand. Victoria paced by the window. Mrs. Johnson and I said nothing, just sat side by side, waiting, guilty on all counts. 23 federal charges including attempted unaliving, witness intimidation, conspiracy, and violations of civil rights. The judge ordered him held without bail pending sentencing, calling him a danger to society. Mr. Johnson screamed as they led him away, threats pouring out until the door slammed shut. His lawyers muttered about appeals, but everyone knew it was over. Federal conviction rates were over 90%, and this case was airtight. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Victim impact statements took 2 full days. Every person he'd hurt got their moment. Parents described children who'd never recovered. Cole talked about his sewer slide attempts. Mrs. Johnson held Katie's picture as she spoke about the daughter she'd lost. I went last, describing not just my assault but the ripple effects, the families we couldn't help when the fund shut down, the children left vulnerable because Mr. Johnson had made us all afraid to act. I talked about Katie's flinch, how I'd known something was wrong but couldn't save her. The judge sentenced Mr. Johnson to life without parole, running consecutive sentences that totaled over 400 years. He cited the particular cruelty of targeting children, the decades of manipulation, the complete lack of remorse. Mr. Johnson would die in federal prison.